Hello! Welcome to our Scream discussion. I'm so excited for you guys to join us. Before we get started, I'm going to show a trailer of the film, and then I'll bring the whole group up and we'll start talking about this amazing movie.
Hello?
Hello?
Who is this?
You tell me your name, I'll tell you mine.
I don't think so.
What's that noise?
Popcorn.
You making popcorn?
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
Someone is playing a deadly game.
It all began with a scream over 911.
Someone who's seen one too many scary movies. Now, he's taken his love of fear
Hello?
Hello, Sydney.
one step too far.
Do you like scary movies?
What's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a scary movie. Number one, you can never have sex. Never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back. Get another beer, you want one? Yeah, sure. I'll be right back.
He didn't make the rules.
Police are always on track if they watch prom night at same time.
He just kills by them. Don't answer the phone. Don't open the door. Don't try to hide.
Everybody, the suspect!
Not scared, are you?
Scream.
All right. Okay. We're going to bring everybody up. Okay. Hey guys, welcome. These women are just awesome, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But when everybody introduces themselves, if you could just kind of give like a quick general impression of what you think of the film, and then we'll get into the deeper discussion questions. So let's start with Andrea.
Hey, I'm Andrea. I work in the Chicago crew film scene here as a coordinator, assistant coordinator, or production manager. With Scream actually came out when I was in high school. And I worked at a Hollywood video at the time and had to watch the promo like over and over and over again. So pop culture wise, it was just a big hit. And at the time, I was such a snooty film person. I would only watch like obscure films. So I didn't watch it until later, and it kind of was reminiscent for me. And I feel like it's one of the first films that really came out that was this kind of meta genre of exploring horror. At that time, it came to a point where there were so many rules of horror that somebody kind of need to expose that. So it's an interesting. It just was a later in life nostalgia moment for me.
Yeah, that's great. Dawn?
Hi, I'm Dawn. I'm based in Salt Lake City. I have a film podcast called Faux Reel, and I'm a filmmaker and film fest producer. And I've been really lucky to have an amazing group of friends who have been watching films in our backyards all summer. And so we watched this film last night. So I've watched it a lot. But watching it again, it was just like, oh my gosh, we need more women in horror film. Because I love the fact that the film is an ode to so many classic horror tropes. But of course, one of those is framing women as victims because of their sexuality and the dichotomy of both desiring, women, but then shaming them and ultimately murdering them for it. So that's what, you know, especially as an adult, stood out to me the most. That I was just like, ah, like, thank God this is made in the 90s and not 2020. But honestly, we're not like in that better of a place right now. Anyway.
Tavi?
Hey everyone, my name is Tavi Viraldi. I am an illustrator, a magnetic media collector, and aspiring film archivist. The movie Scream is so important to me, and I love Wes Craven, most everything he has done. I love the franchise, and I watch Scream probably every year, if not more. It is such I love it so much. Everything about it is so fun. Love Neve Campbell way too much. It's great.
So Tavi, can you show us your VHS?
Yeah, so
show and tell.
My rewatching of it this time, where I usually try to, if I can find a higher resolution, you know, version of Scream, I will do that, but I couldn't find one, so I watched my VHS copy that has a behind-the-scenes featurette, which shamefully I have never watched until I just rewatched this, and it was it was like essentially good time. It's the 90s. We're making jokes.
That's awesome. Thank you, Tavi. Christina?
Hey, I'm Christina Rea. I'm a filmmaker, and I love Scream. Also, it's I don't know if it's one of my favorite movies, but it's one of my favorite horror movies for sure. I saw it when I was a kid, and it was kind of my introduction to slasher films, and what made me want to go back and actually watch all the films that it was referencing. And it sort of is what made me such a big fan of, you know, Halloween and some of the even older slashers. And you can definitely see the sort of meta quality to it in my own work. It's very much influenced me. I'm a big fan of both Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson, who's the screenwriter.
Yeah, that's great. And then Christina, you should put a link to the gaze in the comments, because that's a good one to watch after our discussion. But yeah, so thank you everyone for joining us. I had some specific questions, but I think just to keep things organized, I'll ask the question, and then maybe we'll just go like rotate with your guys' answers. But if you have something that you want to jump in on, like right after somebody says something, feel free to do that. Just make sure you don't cut off the person too much. But I'm excited for some kind of like heated discussion. So my first question has to do with the main character, Neve Campbell as Sydney. I guess I'll just read this question. How does Neve Campbell's heroine subvert the familiar genre tropes regarding female characters? So an example is, you know, they have all those rules, you know, in the movie, like if you do this, then this is going to happen. Like if you're a virgin, you won't be killed. But then if you have sex, then you're going to be killed. But she's like, fuck no, I'm going to have sex and whatever. So I just want to talk about her as a character and how she may be different than other ones, and just what makes her different, and just your thoughts about her as a horror character, I guess. So Andrea, we'll kick off with you.
I think that most horror characters don't have as much personality as she did. She definitely had an independence about her, where I felt like in the movie, everybody kind of put her on her own. I mean, during it, I was like, oh, you guys, her mom died like a year ago. And that now she's being chased and nobody's really doing anything about that. Even the cops, I just felt like she was on her own, and there wasn't a moment where she just broke down and freaked out. She did do the cardinal sin where she went upstairs instead of go out the front door. She broke those rules, but she learned along the way. And I think that she was making her own decisions, even though she was conflicted. Like clearly her boyfriend was a little bit of a predator. I mean, along the line, there were signs, you know, there were definitely signs. But she still had to kind of trust her own intuition. And I think this is the first film that Wes Craven let her come to that decision herself. And didn't let anybody sway her in one direction or the other. And she didn't run to her boyfriend for help. I mean, obviously he wasn't going to give her any of that help, but I feel like, especially, you know, at the end, when she finally makes her own decisions and she gets her legs, so to speak, I feel like no other horror movies do that. Even the ones where the woman gets away, like at the end of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like she gets away. It's just, you know, it's a struggle for her to get away.
I still have to see that one, so.
I just watched it, and it's like, and that one, that the female at the end does get away, but it's still at the same time she never really had a personality. And I feel like the movie, like Sydney was at the helm of everybody having their own personality, whereas Courtney Cox was a very decisive character, whereas her best friend, Rose McGowan, kind of was just going along with everything, and she was in the middle. I like how Wes Craven didn't make a very decisive character, because we wouldn't have been able to go along with her. She wouldn't have been a group for the plot. But the fact that she did come to her own realizations was a really strong thing in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dawn?
I have to be honest, I'm not sure that I got the same impression. I don't know that I felt that she was super different. I felt like she was really framed as this like semi like innocent lamb with her like, you know, old lady night dress on in the beginning, and she's like making out with her boyfriend for like 2 seconds, and it's like, that's enough. And then ultimately she ends up sleeping with her boyfriend, but basically from my impression, only because he had guilted her so much into it. And to me, that sort of, it was like playing with the idea that to me maybe she was different, but then just like thrown her right back into it. And like the second she lost her virginity, she was like immediately like almost murdered. Like, well, I mean, again, but like, I don't know, I guess I thought she kind of just fell into those old tropes. Mm-hmm. But I love her. She's a great character and she's a great actress. But I felt like they were just playing with that idea instead of really changing it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tavi?
Hey, so I feel like Neve Campbell was quite a different character from what we've seen historically in horror. If we go to 96, if we think about female leads in horror beforehand, like even if we're talking about the final girl in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where it's like there wasn't really development, but you saw her fight, and she was the final girl for a reason, even if it was at like skin of her teeth. But something that really stuck out to me this time, and I think it's probably also lingering from Ari Aster's Hereditary and just the pandemic in general and grief in general, is how constantly throughout the film she is dealing with trauma and grief and advocating for herself constantly throughout as a teenager, whether it's with boundaries with her father, her friends, and vulnerability in general, and being very, very open, talking about it. And I feel like that significantly like makes her such a character and has made her so iconic for over 20 years now. And that's why she's coming back to, like, obviously because like Scream 5 is probably going to pay her a lot of money, but like she's been in this franchise the whole time, and it's because there are millions of people that are like rooting for this character. I just, you know, that's just only, I don't want to take up too much time talking about it, but that's something I really admired this time.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Christina?
Yeah, I also noticed that this time, and I just like about Billy, I was just like, her mom died less than a year ago. You're being such an asshole the whole time. And I just kept wondering, why is she dating him? Why did she ever date him? But yeah, I will say it's obviously written by men, written and directed by men. There's still that. And so at the end of the day, she still is not given as much like nuance and agency as I think, you know, we still don't see today fully, but we see it a little bit more, and especially when a woman directs something. I'm sorry, my cat wants to walk across.
Oh. Hi, kitty.
But I do think it's a big turning point in terms of like women in horror being allowed to exist outside of a binary of like either you are the slut or the prude, and the fact that she is able to have sex even though it is sort of coerced and not a healthy first time or relationship in any capacity, but the fact that she is able to and does survive, at least to me, is like a turning point towards where the genre goes after that, where women don't have to exist in the binary quite as much. And so I think it's like a lot of things in the 90s where like still incredibly problematic, but a turning point in representation to get to a better place in a lot of ways. And we still have a lot of far way to go too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And then before I go into the next question, did anybody want to say anything based on what we all just said? If not, I'll just go into the next one.
I did. I actually noticed the bit about grief with her as well. And I felt like that was kind of commentary with the movie where it was like, I feel like horror actually helps people deal with grief and negativity in a way. Like I know when I saw Midsummer, it was liberating for me in dealing with grief. And it's just that I feel like this movie was trying to incorporate that in the 96 way that it could. And the fact that her dad was gone too, and everybody's like, well, I guess he's just gone. Nobody did anything about that. And she just was kind of left on her own. That stood out to me as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. Oh, Tavi.
One more thing on top of that, just talking about grief and just like Craven's character development, where you can see it too, the beginning stages of the very first Nightmare on Elm Street with Nancy, where that character also has a lot more depth and soul than most other final girls or stars in horror franchises as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So I wanted to, for the next question, this isn't really, I mean, it's kind of a question. So that opening with Drew Barrymore, that is, I think, one of the best openings, I don't know, for horror films, but just like in general for a film. Yes. So I wanted to discuss that opening and also how it kind of compares with other horror films. The one that comes to mind is Psycho, with like Janet Leigh's character, where you think that, I mean, I think everybody before they saw Scream, like when it just came out, they all thought it was about Drew Barrymore. Like her face was on everything, and nobody knew that Neve Campbell really was the main character. I'm interested in hearing your guys' thoughts about that opening and Drew Barrymore as like what her purpose was for that film, and why it's such a good opening, and maybe even touch on the whole her representing some kind of female character heroine in a horror film based on your guys' expertise. So I'll we'll just go in the same order, but yeah, then we'll just go from there. So Andrea?
Well, I know Drew Barrymore wanted to do it that way, where nobody would suspect that one of the biggest names in the movie would be the first one to die. So I kind of like that they did that and they didn't necessarily make it about a name. And I just saw an interview with Neve Campbell and Jamie Lee Curtis talking about how they were screen queens. And both of them were like, hey, it was a lead in a feature. They're not really into horror movies. They just did it. A lot of people do that when they get into horror movies. And I think it's awesome that they gave somebody another chance where it wasn't necessarily about like, oh, just come and watch this big star be in a movie. And the fact that the big star was the first one to go was really interesting. And then actually the opening sequence, I am really into like older murder ballads. There's so many old murder ballads around, and they're all about actual murders. And it's the only account that we have of these women who had been murdered. And in a way, it's kind of a form of compassion, because I mean, there are some that are like, that have traveled across from Europe, but back over, that have been translated into Appalachia, and women who have died like years and years ago are still remembered in this way. And I felt like sequences like that, I mean, they're hard to watch, but these things really happen. And it's compassionate in a way that we have to sit there with that feeling, with somebody who's being hunted and preyed and eventually murdered. I felt like that's kind of paying homage to that. And, you know, I mean, with all those old songs, it's like how many women are nameless that no one will ever know them because they were somebody's daughter before they came Mrs. Ann Smith, and no one will ever actually really know their name. And if that is a role that women have played, as hard as it may be to look at that, I feel like we need to see them and sit with them as they go through this. And I like how they didn't necessarily completely pull the punches in the 96 way. I mean, that sequences can get pretty gruesome. So I really liked that they started out with that, because it was like, you immediately had to realize that this movie is not just about the predators, and it's not just watching like a sports show where you're rooting for somebody. This is a victim. You will see her die. You'll see her scream for her parents. I feel like it was a bit of tongue-in-cheek compassion, but I felt like what that movie was trying to do. Whereas before, horror was always not always, but had this formulaic way to go about it that was cathartic, and it was getting cathartic for almost the wrong reasons. Whereas it can be a very, very compassionate way to look at the relationship between the torturer and the tormented.
Wow, that's interesting. I appreciate that perspective. Dawn?
So I thought that the opening scene, I mean, it's fantastic. It's so well done. It's so scary, and it's not what you would expect to happen at all. But it is, it kind of loops back around with the ending, a nod to Psycho in the same kind of way. Like in the end of the film, you know, the killers talk about how they are influenced by Norman Bates, and we all know, well, probably all know, in Psycho, when we see the woman get murdered, and you are like, wait, what? That's the main character. How could she possibly die? Like, it's the same kind of thing with Drew Barrymore. But thematically, what really stuck with me is relating back to what I was talking about before, where Drew Barrymore's character is like physically very like sweet looking. Like, she has a full covered sweater on, like a cute little haircut. But she lies to the man on the phone that she doesn't have a boyfriend and is flirting with him. And then all of a sudden turns out that she starts screaming she does have a boyfriend. And so it just felt like you're like another, you know, similar to Neve Campbell's like grandma pajama, like Drew Barrymore is wearing a sweater, and they just shift her into a victim by having her flirt and lie that she's single. And then, you know, bam, she's dead. So I just feel like they're like playing with the female victim tropes and like sort of like changing it a little bit, but I feel like ultimately it's like still the same. Like, they're very likable characters and really well-known women in film, but I don't know, that's that's how I saw it. That's what I took away.
Yeah, Tavi?
So that opening scene, I think, is one of my favorites in slasher history in general, because it's almost like you're getting a feature before you get to the feature, which I think is super fun. And it does follow a lot of tropes, like Dawn was saying, but it still does play with like the nut tropes too, where it's just like instantly like seeing it first time when I was a teenager, and you have the superstar Drew Barrymore being like, yeah, I like horror movies, like, yeah, I'll play your game, like, yeah, I'll do this. And then like I feel like the trope of like this fucking horror nerd like getting her on like a technicality of a quiz question was also pretty great. Also the effects in that movie, the opening of that scene, because the weight of like the acting was pretty good too, but also like the gore from her boyfriend Kevin, like getting sliced open, to like when she does get murdered and hung, like it's very disturbing imagery, and like also really great craftsmanship with special effects and like kind of like a last leg of practical effects in a way. But yeah, everything about that scene I love is so campy, and just like the Jiffy Pop, and I mean like That's how they made like a meta like comedy movie about it starring like the Wayans brothers, you know, like there's so much. Like that one scene has like given fuel to like so many horror fires. And like once again, like I'm gonna mention again, like Wes Craven reinventing the genre again by doing this, by starting a movie like this, like not really done before. It's just, I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah. Christina?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, from like a filmmaking perspective, it's kind of perfect, like the way it hits beats and from the way it uses space to the music, just the tension that it builds is so good. And then obviously Drew Barrymore dying in the first scene kind of tells the audience that like all bets are off, like anyone can die in this movie. And so it creates interesting stakes that I think, you know, a lot of previous slashers, it's like, you know exactly who's going to survive and who's going to die because of the tropes and how they've been set up. And this kind of just throws that all out the window in a way. So I do love that. It's obviously, again, like when we're talking about gender in this movie, it's always going to come back to problematic elements because it is written and directed by men. But I will say that something that I really picked up on rewatch is that the reason she dies is because she dumped Stu. And he's just like an entitled asshole who like couldn't handle it because of his fragile male ego. And like, that's ultimately what the movie is about, is just like toxic masculinity and their inability to handle the fact that they don't get what they want. And so they start killing people. And so I think that like, whether that was the intention or not by the writer and director, it still is like a reading of the film, that it's a commentary on just like men being toxic and not being able to be adults and just like handle stuff the way that women can. And so, you know, there's that other side of the reading in terms of gender for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. Did anybody want to add on to that discussion bit? Tavi.
Well, to what Christina was saying just about masculinity and just like being able to like handle something, where kind of talking about the character Sidney Prescott again, where it's like her mom dies and she is like, I'm trying to exist. And then her boyfriend's parents get a divorce and he is like, you know what, we're going to take this really far and I'm going to kill the person that was involved in the, like, that was the reason for his parents splitting up, where it's just like the most extreme scenario possible.
Yeah, it was like he wanted to own them so much that it's not just about owning them, it's about taking them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so I guess I haven't really been adding my own thoughts too much. I've been just asking you guys to say things, which is more fun for me. But I based on what you guys all said, it is very interesting to me. And I was thinking, Andrea, after you were talking about just like those murder ballads or whatever you were talking about with those women, I mean, now that I think about it, it's like, I mean, it's very scary. just that whole, like, I think what's terrifying for me is just that scene, that part where her parents are coming in and she's being pulled by the killer, and then you just hear her voice and then, you know, that's right, you see her before you, like, it's like a quick show of like her, I think she's hanging from a tree or something. I don't know. I'm trying to remember. I probably blacked that out, but it's very tragic stuff. You know, horrors can be fun, but it's also really can be like tragic and sad, you know, as well. So yeah, I'll go into our next. We're kind of getting to the last. I don't know. We'll get into one more question and then final thoughts. But I wanted to, my boyfriend did a little research for me. He sent me this piece on Rose McGowan was talking about Scream. And this is a recent piece. And I just wanted to read her quote here. She said, Scream is the kind of movie where people hand it down to their little brother or sister and they think it's a classic. I always think when I listen to music or watch movies, be careful, kids. These are going to be your classics. It's a good one in the canon of film history, and it really did revive the horror show at that point because it wasn't a big thing at that point. And what I thought was interesting was, you know, her character to me is like super tragic, just how, you know, she dies and, you know, we don't see her at all for the rest of the series, but she was asked, like, if you could come back to the series, what would you be? And I think she was talking, just hold on. She could still have a twin. Oh, she was talking about coming back as a twin, a institutionalized twin where she's been in like institutionalized and she comes with black hair and then she kicks everyone's ass because she's pissed as fuck, like what they did to her sister. And I'm like, yes, that is great. So my question for you is, if you could take Scream, if you could take like one character or one storyline into your own magical Scream universe, what would that be? Because Rose McGowan, I love what she said. I just come back and I'd like have revenge. Is there a character that you would have liked to see or seen in a different way in a new, you know, universe, Scream universe? And hopefully that question isn't too complicated. Andrea, I'll let you kick it off.
Okay. Admittedly, I have not seen any of the other, I haven't seen the sequels. So I was kind of intrigued by Courtney Cox, only because I had just seen I'll Be Gone in the Dark about the Golden State Killer and Michelle McNamara. And she reminded me of these true crime reminds me of horror. I think both of them are kind of like a survival guide for women to, you know, survive toxic, terrible, murderous men. But I felt like her character was actually pushing forward the investigation where the dumb cop was just enamored with her and was like, whatever. And after seeing that and seeing kind of citizen detectives, I would be interested in seeing somebody do something like that, take it upon themselves to try to crack these cases. And I thought it was interesting that she was the only one who actually knew the truth, who tried to tell Sydney the truth herself and was just so tenacious until the end. I mean, it's also a horror movie rule that if you get in a car to drive away, the car will immediately go in the ditch or into a tree, like immediately. And you thought she was gone, and I like how they brought her back. So I think I'd kind of like to see something along those lines, where it's kind of like, you know, the other horror movie is Buffy, and Buffy could have never gotten as far as she did without the nerds. So just have the nerd do it.
Mm-hmm.
Have the nerd be the best.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna go on totally different than everything I've been saying, and say that I love Matthew Lillard, and his character is so great, and he's so great, but his motivation is so lame. Mm-hmm. It's so basic. It's just so lame, and so I wish, like, Billy's character, like, his motivation was also lame, but it was like dealt with trauma and his parents splitting and his mom abandoning him, so he had more of like a reason. But Stu, the character Stu, is just like, I'm a psychopath and I've been rejected a couple times, and that just like wasn't good enough for me. And he's just such a great character and actor. I wish that had like a little bit more.
Javi?
I was actually gonna say Stu too, because I do like rewatching it so many times. In the end, when he's just like bleeding, he's like, my mom and dad are gonna kill me, and he's on the phone with Sydney and they're kind of having it out, and she's just like, why did you do it? And he's like, well, I was going to say it's about peer pressure and I'm so sensitive. And then his speech gets cut off by Billy immediately. And honestly, I would have really liked to know the whole thing that like would have been written out for him to kind of paint over to what he was actually doing, like killing people. Like, I would want to know more of that, like why he would play the sensitive male if he was actually a sensitive male and how his masculinity tied into that, and like why peer pressure actually tied into that. I think it would have been like a fun thing to have him like be revived in the sequels in ways and like potentially come back as like an advocate in a way. I think would have been like fun for me. And like also, Andrea, I will say about Gale Weathers, like you get so much really, really, really good Gale Weathers and Deputy Dewey in all of the sequels.
Cool.
So I do agree with Stu for sure from this movie. I'm going to break the rules a little bit and just point out that there really are no characters of color in this film, and particularly women of color. And so what I would do is take Jada Pinkett Smith's character from the opening scene of the second one and weave her into this plot and then make her a co-protagonist of the sequel. Yeah.
That's great. I think we all should do a new Scream. Let's do our own version. Christina, you could direct it. We'll figure it out. But yeah, that's great. Now I just want to go final thoughts. Just, you know, something that you want to leave with about the film that, you know, yes. So just a final thought about Scream. Andrea, I'll let you start.
I think that Scream was kind of a gateway into a new renaissance of horror that we're experiencing big time now. I think it just broke it down. I actually read Roger Ebert's review of it, and he was kind of like, this film is for people who know what Fangoria is. If you don't know what Fangoria is, you might not necessarily like it. And I don't feel like that's true. I think it's open to a broader audience, but I feel like since movies have been around, which have not been that long, this was right at the point where, you know, it was still shot on film, but it definitely has that video cassette look about it. And I just, in watching it, and the fact that it's killed its biggest star right away, and kind of flipped everything in the way that it could be in '96, which was the Bush years, just opened the door for everybody else to start making horror in a completely different way. And when I was talking about the level of compassion, I feel like there's a lot more socially relevant films right now. In fact, we were talking about films directed by women. I actually just worked on Candyman, the remake, which was directed by a woman. I'm really excited about that. That's going to be awesome. And seeing the direction that that's going in is really exciting. And I think Scream actually is one of the films that opened the door for this. It's great that Wes Craven did that, opened the door for other people to explore that, even though it doesn't have nearly the diversity it should. I totally agree with that. And I'd like to see more of that.
Dawn?
Yeah, I think the film is just like such a classic, and it matters that it was made in '96, but like you can watch it today and it's so fun. Like watching it again with my friends last night was awesome. And what Andrea is saying, like if you have a strong background in watching horror films, like it's so much more fun to see all of the little nods to, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Psycho, all that stuff is just like all throughout the film. It's super fun. But I'm excited that I've been hearing so much more lately about more women in horror film. And I think we're putting some film recommendations that I had in the comments of some, because I love Wes Craven. He's obviously an amazing horror director, but the film is so clearly made by a man, and it just like made me just be like, like female characters can be so multidimensional and can go so much farther than like being an innocent woman to being a horror. Like there's so much more that we can be. And so I'm excited for female filmmakers to be able to take this genre and move way, way, way past that.
Tavi?
Hey, so final thoughts about Scream. Just how intelligent and quick, and I feel like the shots in the movie, the acting, everything, the score still feels so good, and it feels so fun watching it still. And from being someone like me that like every October I'm going to be watching Scream or Scream 4 or whichever one of these from the franchise, but like being able to see something new every time and being able to see something new in a character, like getting older with age, where it's just like, what does misogyny mean in 2020 versus 96, and reflecting on that. And then also as horror as a genre grows and has like gained a lot of momentum and more popularity and like more inclusion and more women, more POC, more queers, everything. It's really fun to look at this as kind of not a gateway, because that's not what it was meant for, but another way to make a horror movie. And that fueled so much. And I really appreciate Scream for that.
Great. Christina?
Yeah, I'll just echo all that. I mean, I love it. It's great. It's fun. And also, it's a product of its time. And I think that's part of what makes it so fun. And it's important to watch the stuff that came after it. And I also, I can't comment, but I have a link that my friend just put together an article of 5 of the best horror films by Black women that you can watch. And so I think that you should totally check that out. I'll throw it in the private chat.
Okay. Well, I'm really glad we did this. This is kind of is it our first? Yeah, this may be our first official film discussion event, and just to have your horror minds a part of this, I think it's really important for many reasons. One, I think it's important to have female voices talking about horror films, because often, I mean, Roger Ebert's great, but like we're just like, oh, this dude said this about this film, and we don't know what women think about horror movies. So having this discussion, I think it was really, really important. Also, just bringing up that there's some amazing horror films out there directed by women. And so, yeah, so keep watching. We'll keep doing this kind of thing. And thank you for everyone